Thousands of years ago, our ancestors pulled off one of the strangest and most incredible breakthroughs in human history. We managed to earn the trust of wild wolves and turn them into loyal dogs. Ancient wild cattle eventually transformed into gentle dairy cows. Wild boars were changed into ordinary domestic pigs. Wild horses became our indispensable companions, reliable workers, and primary transportation. Humans completely altered entire biological species so they could fit perfectly into the framework of human civilization. Yet there is an interesting detail that most Americans today never even think about. Almost all of these massive transformations of wildlife happened thousands of years ago, which raises a logical and puzzling question. Does this mean we have already domesticated every single species that had any practical value? Or is there still some creature alive on our planet capable of following the wolf's path and becoming man's next best friend? Surprisingly, modern science actually has a very specific and unexpected frontrunner. If leading biologists had to place a financial bet on the next species to yield to humans, they would choose foxes. To understand the reasons behind this choice, we first need to break down a fundamental rule of biology. The vast majority of wild animals on Earth are absolutely terrible candidates for successful domestication. People very often confuse the simple taming of an individual animal with true genetic domestication. However, these two concepts are fundamentally different from one another. For instance, a fierce tiger raised by humans from a cub in an American wildlife sanctuary can become quite tame. It might calmly tolerate the presence of keepers and even display signs of genuine affection, but that behavior from a predator by no means makes tigers domestic animals. True domestication only happens when an entire species changes at the genetic level over many generations. For a striking example, look at African zebras. For several centuries in a row, explorers and enthusiasts stubbornly tried to tame them. On paper or in theory, these striped animals seem like the absolutely perfect candidates. In terms of size, they are practically identical to ordinary American horses. Yet there is an interesting detail that most Americans today never even think about. They look almost identical to horses, so it is logical to assume they could be ridden or used to haul cargo. However, any experienced zoologist will tell you right away that zebras possess an absolutely uncontrollable and wild nature. Unlike ordinary horses, which evolved over millions of years in the relatively safe European and Asian steppes, zebras grew up in the brutal conditions of the African savanna. Throughout their entire existence, they shared the same territory with the planet's most dangerous predators: lions, cheetahs, hyenas, and crocodiles. This constant neighborhood with ruthless killers developed a unique evolutionary survival mechanism in zebras. They have incredibly fast reflexes, an aggressive disposition, and instantly switch into a fierce self-defense mode at the slightest hint of potential danger. If you tried to simply approach a wild zebra and throw a rope over it, it will either severely injure you with its powerful hooves or instantly bite you. It is precisely because of these innate genetic behavioral traits that zebras turned out to be completely unsuited for the traditional process of domestication. A great many similar examples of failed domestication attempts have accumulated throughout world history. For centuries, humans tried to subject majestic elephants, fierce cheetahs, swift antelopes, and even dangerous African buffaloes to their will. However, all of these massive and long-term attempts ultimately ended in complete and resounding failure. And this brings us to an extremely interesting and crucial scientific pattern. The famous scientist and popular author Jared Diamond detailed the principles that became known as the Anna Karenina principle in biology. The core of this rule is incredibly simple. For the successful domestication of a wild animal, absolutely all key biological factors must align at the same time. If even one of these critically important elements is missing or goes wrong, successful domestication of the species becomes completely impossible. The animal must naturally possess a friendly or calm disposition, lack an innate tendency to panic from fear, and breed easily in captivity. And this is where we finally return to our main and surprising contender: ordinary foxes. In the second half of the 20th century, geneticist Dmitry Belyaev decided to conduct a unique and incredibly massive scientific experiment. He wanted to see if the evolutionary path from a wild wolf to a domestic dog could be artificially repeated using silver foxes. The researchers based their work on one very strict and simple selection criterion: the complete absence of aggression and fear toward humans. In each new generation of foxes, the scientists carefully selected only those individuals for further breeding that displayed the greatest friendliness. Foxes that growled, bit, or tried to flee in panic when a human approached were entirely excluded from the experimental program. The results of this unique biological experiment astonished the entire global scientific community. In just a few decades of continuous selection, the foxes changed beyond recognition, not only in their behavior but also in their physical appearance. They began wagging their tails with joy whenever humans appeared, whining whimperingly to get attention, and obediently licking the keeper's hands. Along with this amazing and unique shift in behavior, other unexpected metamorphoses occurred. Bright white and star-like patches began to appear en masse on their once solid-colored fur. The sharp ears of the foxes suddenly lost their original stiffness and became cute and floppy, exactly like a puppy's, and their long, fluffy tails began to noticeably curl upward, a trait previously characteristic exclusively of domestic dogs. In scientific circles, this phenomenon received the official name Domestication syndrome. It vividly proved to the world that selecting animals based on a single trait triggers a chain reaction of deep changes throughout the entire organism. The drop in stress hormones and adrenaline automatically dragged along serious transformations in physical appearance. This unique and long-term experiment continues in Novosibirsk to this day, drawing in new generations of scientists. However, another equally logical question arises here. Are ordinary Americans ready to welcome such an unusual creature into their homes? Despite all their incredible friendliness, domesticated foxes still remain true foxes in many ways. They possess a strong, specific scent that is practically impossible to remove from carpets or furniture. They absolutely love to dig deep dens, so your favorite couch or manicured lawn will quickly face the threat of destruction. In addition, foxes are primarily nocturnal, creating a lot of noise during the dark hours of the night. Therefore, even though this amazing biological experiment proves successful, the fox is unlikely to become a mainstream household pet. But the true story of successful wildlife domestication hides a much deeper secret. Recent studies by leading historians suggest something completely unexpected about our past. This entire process was never the result of one-sided, rigid control on the part of humans. In reality, it was a mutually beneficial and genuine cooperation between two entirely different biological species. The animals that successfully walked this path were not necessarily the strongest or the smartest among others. They simply turned out to be the most capable of building deep social relationships with human tribes. Ancient wild wolves became loyal dogs because this partnership brought immense benefits to both sides. Humans gained reliable protection and help during the hunt, while wolves received a steady supply of food and a safe, warm hearth. Wild cats also stayed to live near human settlements back in the day for entirely pragmatic reasons. Life alongside humans, who were building the first large grain barns, turned out to be significantly easier than constant survival in the wild. The barns inevitably attracted a huge number of rodents, turning human settlements into the ideal place for feline hunting. In other words, cats essentially domesticated themselves. They came to humans not because they were forced, but because it was profitable. And this opens up a stunning and entirely new perspective for us on the future. It is entirely possible that somewhere right now, at this very second, another wild animal species is living on Earth and already taking its first steps down that same evolutionary path, a path that wild wolves and cautious forest cats once successfully traveled long ago. And this process is happening once again, not because humanity designed some grand scientific project or a secret plan. The animals are doing it simply because living long-term alongside modern human civilization turns out to be incredibly advantageous for them. If such a unique animal species truly exists on our planet, ordinary foxes are currently the best candidate. They possess an amazing level of intelligence, are highly social creatures, and easily adapt to any extreme environmental conditions. Furthermore, the entire world has already clearly seen how incredibly fast their bodies react to artificial biological selection. However, the real answer to this question might turn out to be much deeper, more paradoxical, and more thrilling than just a story about foxes. After all, the entire centuries-old history of domestication hints at one very unexpected and vital truth. The true domestication of animals was never built solely on the human desire to completely control nature or break it to our will. This complex process always held together through mutual respect, trust, and sincere voluntary cooperation. The animals that successfully completed this journey and stayed with us were not necessarily the strongest or the most aggressive predators. They simply turned out to be those unique creatures that possessed an innate ability to build deep emotional bonds with humans. Wild wolves once turned into loyal dogs precisely because this great partnership brought colossal benefits to both sides of evolution. Cats stayed to live nearby forever because life in cozy human settlements was much easier and safer than a constant struggle in the wild. And it is entirely possible that the next domesticated species on our planet will appear in exactly the same natural and wonderful way, not because of some complex or forced scientific experiment in closed laboratories, and not because we decided it in advance, but simply because one specific animal species will slowly and gradually realize that its future alongside us is significantly better than without us. Therefore, when ordinary people ask leading biologists which exact animal will be domesticated next in the world, from the standpoint of dry academic science, the most likely, logical, and accurate answer undoubtedly remains foxes. However, a far more exciting, profound, and incredible evolutionary possibility lies elsewhere. Humanity's true next domestic animal might turn out to be a creature we haven't even mentioned today, but it is already taking its first confident steps toward humans, forever changing the future of our shared civilization. This video was crafted by Adam to make big ideas simple and clear for you. Don't miss out on the next breakdown. Subscribe now and let's keep exploring together.